If you've had any cryptid encounters that you'd like me to share on here, email me at jttosstories@gmail.com. Story 1. In college, I lived up on top of a mountain road, but still only 5 minutes to town, down a trail through the woods. There was a 100-plus-year-old oak in the yard, slab stone porch built by hand, and I lived in the studio apartment that was outside of the main house. The main house was haunted, but my shack was cozy. The woods up there were pretty weird, too. I never really was in the main house at all, but the three who lived there said some nights you couldn't sleep because of all the noise. Floorboards creaking, thumps, knocks, etc. My experiences happened outside. Like I said, I hunted small game up there, as there must have been a rabbit colony in the vicinity, plus a few squirrel drays. Often out there, while I was stalking, I get the distinct feeling of being stalked myself. Keeping in mind, this strand of forest is only several acres, but was preserved mainly because of the historic oak trees scattered around. It's pretty old woods. I would hear laughter, like children's laughter, but not quite like in a creepy movie. It was a bit distorted and almost like flirty giggles you might hear a fairy make. It would come from a different direction each time I saw it. I eventually decided to stop following it and hunt. It never did stop. I would sometimes spend an afternoon in town having drinks or hanging out at my friend's place. I'd finally leave and have enough liquid courage to hike back up by the trail in the dark. That laughter would be replaced by noise. Just like things running all around you and dashing about the trees. I've been an outdoorsman for a long time, and I know the woods are noisy at night, particularly in the southern Appalachians, but this was different. It was dead silent out there in that stand at night, except for this rushing to and from by some unseen feet. Not like game fleeing, though. Deer run away and crash about doing it. These steps were like something, or some things, running swiftly around me. It's like it would cross the trail up ahead, then behind me, then alongside, but I could never see anything. I was a big-time night owl back then, and was regularly up doing schoolwork into 3 or 4 in the morning. One such night, it had just snowed a fresh 20 inches or so, which is pretty decent accumulation for the area. Our yard and the woods were like a paradise for my dog and I. I was excited to hunt around the next day for tracks, and see if I couldn't locate the rabbit den precisely. I was up working, and the dog came scratching to get in. Not frantic or anything. I let her in, and she lay down to sleep, which was pretty odd because she's a husky and preferred the snow to my tiny heated apartment, every time. I decided to call it a night too, and I went out for a cigarette. It was 3:24 a.m., and I could still see it on the top of my MacBook display before I closed it. I went out and noticed that the clouds were dispersed a bit and the moon was bright on snow. I lit my cigarette and was just looking out across the fence and into the woods when something caught my eye. It looked just like a silhouette of somebody leaning against one of those big oak trees. Like you'd see somebody with a palm planted against a wall with their arm straight out, leaning against it. It wasn't moving, so I can't tell if I'm just tired or the lighting is funny or what. So I walked further to the end of the porch, and as soon as I stepped on the fresh snow, it took off. That thing was tall. My estimates, based off of the tree's height, put the thing at around 7 feet. It ran along the border of the fence and back off into the woods. It was hairless, as far as I can tell, and completely naked. Otherwise, though, its form was just that of a tall, skinny man. I went inside and put my boots on, grabbed my rifle, and my flashlight and went outside to check the tracks. I picked up a set of what had to be size 14 or size 15 bare feet tracks. It ran along the fence and down the treeless stretch of backyard as if it was heading into the woods. But then the tracks just stopped about 20 feet short of the tree line. I don't know if it jumped to the tree line. Probably could have. But there weren't any more tracks that I could find that night or the next day. It was like it somehow just vanished. I was never able to explain that one. Story 2. There is a mountain that I live near that I collect stones on here in Oregon. Quartz crystals, tourmaline, gold, you name it. It's an old mining area that has abandoned mine shafts and dilapidated old buildings from the 1800s. The roads up this mountain are treacherous, taking quite a while to get up if you accidentally take the wrong being unmaintained, roads. One day, my roommate and I decided to go collect stones up there. It was spring, and the weather was great. We hadn't seen signs of other people all day. A quiet day in the National Forest, as kids were still in school. We made it up the mountain and set up camp. We poked around the area, finding a few crystals here and there, and even though I'd been up this mountain many, many times, something felt off this time. This crude camping area, with its makeshift toilet, was extremely remote, but I'd never felt anything strange there before. It was as if we were being watched. That feeling you get in your subconscious that you cannot seem to shake. But I did, and we carried on with our day. At around 9 p.m., after preparing a fire and some food, we decided to head to bed. The tent was about 50 feet from the car, and that made me feel comfortable. I have hiked constantly in super extreme remote areas for many years now and have run into some sketchy situations. It's not comfortable when you're scared and hours away from a vehicle on foot. The forest can become overwhelming under those circumstances. But this time was different. We had the car right there, so what could go wrong, really? I'd just about fallen asleep, and my roommate was already out like a light when the noise caught my attention. It sounded like the brush just in the tree line shaking. We were surrounded by forest on all sides, except for a boulder field to the back of our tent, up against a massive mountain peak with an amazing rock face. I have sat there listening to the bushes shake, wondering what could be out there. It's not unusual to have elk or small animals like possums coming to camp and walk through, but this was definitely something big. What happened next made my blood run cold. I hear the bushes stop shaking, and something takes a step onto the ground. It had a loud step. I know that sounds strange, but it's really just the best way to describe it. It then proceeds to walk right up to the tent. What made me lose my cool mentally was that it was on 2 legs. I could identify right away that this was not a 4-legged regular animal coming around camp. I laid there as still as I could and listened. All I could hear was heavy breathing. Then it all went quiet. Again, I hear the bushes rattle, and it walks up to the tent again. The bizarre part is, I never heard it back away from the tent. That really messed with my head. After a few minutes of silence had passed, I jammed my roommate in the ribs with my elbow and whispered, as uncomfortable making a noise made me feel, just for him to listen. Just be quiet and listen. After a few minutes of him looking at me like I'd lost my mind, the bushes shook and whatever it was, walked up to the tent again. My roommate's eyes got big, and he whispered, "Oh my God, that thing's on 2 feet." He knew how I felt by the look on my face, and didn't even expect a response. We sat there for a good 20 minutes listening to this thing walk up to the tent over and over, but never walk away. Then, whatever it was, walked over to the crude bathroom and started shaking it violently. Both of us, now lying in our sleeping bags, debating in our minds what to do next. After a good 45 minutes of everything that was going on, got silent. So we sat there perfectly still for another 20 minutes and silence. That's when I turned to my roommate and said, "We need to go." I had had well enough by this time. All we had for defense was a small axe in the tent with us, which looking back was so very foolish. I grabbed the axe and I said, "We're going to book it to the car, get in, and lock the doors." And we did just that. We ripped the tent zipper down the fastest we could without it getting caught and hightailed it right for the car. My roommate turned the car on immediately and turned the headlights on, illuminating the entire camping area with our tent in front of the car. Nothing. No signs of anything in our limited visual field. My roommate then jumps out of the car, runs up and grabs the tent with everything in it, runs back and throws it all in the back seat, and we take off down the mountain in the pitch black. The entire time I'm expecting whatever that thing was to come running out of the car. I have camped up in the area a few good times, as, I kid you not, it is one of the most beautiful, pristine, subalpine areas you will ever see. I've had 2 other experiences, though both we were camping in the car, as I will never sleep in a tent again. The natives used to call this area Skuka Mountain, and said it was haunted by the evil god of the woods. The miners had a rough time here. It's a rugged country, filled with a great many perils. Story 3. In March of 2015, I woke up at around 3 a.m. I have no idea why. Usually I wake up to drink water or to use the bathroom, but I didn't need to do either of those. Anyway, I was living in Southern California at the time, near Camp Pendleton, and where I lived, there was just my neighborhood, then just wilderness. There was nothing beyond my neighborhood for miles, just land, and just an FYI, while I've always been interested in the supernatural, I don't think I really believed in it until this experience happened. Before I went to sleep, I opened my window because it was hot, and I had my curtains open and my shades open, which I pulled up to make sure air was getting in. So at 3 a.m., I woke up and just looked out my window, which was next to my bed, and I thought I saw something standing at the crosswalk across the street. I was just thinking, that's so weird, because usually we didn't have runners or early morning walkers until about 4:45 a.m. So I got up and went to my window so I could get a closer look, and what I saw, I will never forget. The thing was standing, but its legs were bent, and it had some white fur covering the body. However, I could still see some skin. Its back was hunched over, and its face looked like some sort of dog's. If this creature were standing up, I'd say that it would probably be around 7 or 8 feet tall. Now, mind you, this was at 3 a.m., so I was like, okay, you're hallucinating, go back to sleep. However, I was literally paralyzed and could not take my eyes off of this creature. Its nose and ears just looked so similar to a dog's or some kind of wolf or a coyote. Where I live, coyotes were very prevalent, but they never really came into the neighborhood. So, as you can tell, I was completely shocked and nervous, and as I was about to shut my window, the thing turned its head and stared right at me. It was standing directly under a streetlight, so I could see its features very clearly. Its eyes were so black, but somehow they were shining to where you could see them staring right into your soul. That did it for me. I slammed my window shut, pulled down the blinds, closed the curtains, and jumped right into bed while pulling the covers over my face. I never went back to sleep that night. Flash forward 2 years later, in June of 2017. I again woke up, but this time I was just hungry. So I went downstairs to get some food, and I sat at my kitchen table. In the chair that I sat, my back was facing the window on the side of the house. This window was about a foot off the ground, and it was open about 10 inches because my mom forgot to shut it. Now, That window had no screen because it got torn somehow, and we really just didn't get around to replacing it yet. Anyway, I had my earbuds in, and I was watching a movie or a show. I can't exactly remember, but I heard a noise. I couldn't tell if it was from the movie or from outside, so I paused it and I just listened. I then heard heavy breathing, but I've never heard this kind of breathing before. It was coming from directly behind me, right outside the window. The breathing was rough, rigid, and didn't sound like anything human. I was too scared to turn around. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up, and I had goosebumps everywhere. The breathing lasted for around 2 minutes, and then I heard heavy footsteps, as if this thing was walking away. After about 10 minutes had passed, I shut the window, locked it, closed the curtains, and ran up to my room. I told my parents about my first encounter the next day after it happened. I was 16 at the time and still living with them. They just kind of looked at me and laughed and said I was seeing things and that it was probably just a coyote. After my second encounter, I told them the next day, and that time they really thought I was just tired and was hearing things. My question to everyone out there is, have any of you experienced something like this? Was this just a coyote, or do you think that I was hallucinating? It's been bothering me for a while now, and I really just want to get my story out there because I cannot deal with no answers.